Hello, everyone. Art Burns here, wishing you well today. I hope that you're meeting the day with presence, with acceptance, and with compassion, because these are the qualities that are going to allow and cultivate the conditions for well-being and for happiness. From these conditions or from these qualities are going to arise, patience, are going to arise more, mental focus, more empathy, more, understanding of what's happening around you. And this is really the foundation of everything that we talk about here, especially with mindfulness training. And of course, this is all facilitated by awareness, right? When we practice mindfulness, when we just practice paying attention to what's happening as it's happening, and doing so without judgment, right? Doing so without that filter of judging our experience, right? When we do this regularly and with intention and repetition, what we do is we open our awareness, right? We broaden the level of our awareness so that we can see things about ourselves and about the rest of the world around us, in a more clear and sort of vivid sense that allows us to then grow and to be our true selves, right? So much of what we encounter, so much of how we encounter the world, I should say, is done so through this sort of filter of who we are, like our nature, right? And unfortunately, most of the time our nature is comprised of things that are very long history kind of conditioning that happened when we were very, very young, right? And of course they, because we tend to gravitate back towards the same kind of circumstances in our lives, right? We're constantly reinforcing those sort of filters that we developed when we were very, very young, right? And so this is one of the things that becomes, that we become aware of as we're practicing mindfulness, right? So let me say this a different way. So between the age, and I've talked about this a lot, so pardon me for repeating myself, but this is really important. It's really important to understand this, right? So between the age of birth and around 7 years old, right, every human being is developing their sort of programming, right? The sort of the foundation on which they build their entire understanding of the world and their entire, sort of habitual and automatic way in which they relate to the world around us, right? And so what this means is, when you're, 4 or 5 years old, 2, 3, whatever, any time in that entire time between birth and seven, what you're doing is you're watching, you're absorbing, right? You're absorbing the way that people interact with you, the way that people interact with each other, the way that that everything kind of moves around you. Now, when we sense how people interact with us, right? Specifically our primary caregivers, right? Whether that's the mother or the father, whatever the situation is, right? That's how we're building our sort of aptitude for emotional connection, right? So if we have a parent, a primary parent, normally it's the mother, but not always. But so but if that primary parent is very attuned to us, right, like gives us that emotional connection, like when we're looking at each other in the eyes, right? If we feel that level of emotional connection, then we're building a stronger sense of being able to connect to others, right? And so the child that has that, right, the child who has a parent, a primary caregiver who is emotionally attuned to him or her, is going to grow up more emotionally balanced with a higher sort of automatic aptitude for emotional intelligence, and also for for being able to connect and be vulnerable with other people, right? However, the child who lacks that is likely to experience emotional issues, right? Developmental as well as sort of life issues, and this is kind of where ADD comes from, and this is where all kinds of addiction issues are going to come from. This is where where pushing away from in relationships is going to come from, where complications in relationships are going to come from. Remember, we always marry our mother or marry our father, and that's what that means, right? That we're going to whatever we experience in those early years of our lives, that's how we're going to relate to everyone else, right? So if our primary caregiver was not as connected and as as sort of emotionally available to us, then we're not going to be connected and emotionally available to our spouse later on in life. It's just the way it goes, right? Because however, it's most likely, because the thing is that we are, we have the ability to change this, right? And that's really what I'm getting at here, right? When we're practicing mindfulness, right, as I started to say before, when we're focused in on our daily moment to moment experiences, right, as they're happening, right, without the judgment of saying like, oh man, I wish this wasn't happening, or oh gosh, I wish this could have happened instead. When we let go of all that and really focus on just what is happening, right? And we do this through formal meditation. We also do it through informal practices, right? It's a combination. It's a sort of a foundational sort of practice that includes all of it, right? And so when we do that, right, what we do is we bring, those. So the things that I'm talking about, right, the way in which we're going to relate to others because of the way that people related to us. This is very closely tied into the implicit stuff that's happening, right? The implicit biases and also the implicit memories that we have, right? Like we don't remember, when we were 3 years old, how our parent might have reacted to something, right? But that memory does exist in our implicit awareness, meaning it's outside of our consciousness, right? And so what we do when we expand our awareness through these practices, what we tend to be able to do is to bring that implicit into the explicit. And so these programmings and these sort of filters that we build up in these first 7 years, as we practice these contemplative exercises, we start to realize that we start to see how this is affecting us, right? So in other words, again, the way I said is that the implicit becomes explicit, right? So it goes from this subconscious thing that we don't understand why we're always in this pattern and always in this cycle and always in this why we always wind up getting into the same issues over and over and over again, right? That's a very common thing. It used to be very common for me, before I learned these practices. But once you start to develop this expanded awareness, you start to see, well, oh, that's why I do that. It becomes very clear as to why it is that these things are happening to you, right? And so the point that I'm making here, or the reason why I'm telling you this here, right, is because as parents, right, if you look, right, and if you notice, and you could read books about this. I mean, there's several great books about how generational things, whether it's generational trauma or just generational aspects of our experience, right, that we tend to pass things along, right? Like we tend to even at the level of an abusive relationship, right, almost every time that they see someone in an abusive relationship, it can be traced back to see that their parents were abusive and that their parents were abusive, right? Now this goes from everything of that type of behavioral thing, also to genetic things like stress levels and even diseases and all kinds of stuff like that, right? It's generational, right? So that's not a foreign concept to most of us, right? So, but that's the thing, right? That generational sort of hand down of all of these, especially on the emotional level, of all these sort of, issues and hang-ups and tendencies that we have to hurt ourselves and hurt others, right? That comes from that generational kind of trauma and all that, right? It oftentimes, when we talk about it like this, and we look at these studies that show that generation after generation after generation, that this is how it went, the reality is that it's not as much of a sentence the way it makes it seem, right? So like when we look at this and we read studies that show that, yeah, like abusive women, for instance, are they marry, I'm sorry, women who are in abusive relationships who marry an abusive husband, right? Almost every single time they can trace back and see that they were abused by their father, right? And so you go back to like what's natural and normal to you, right? Now, of course, that's a very extreme circumstances, but we all tend to do that, right? We tend to get into the same sort of emotional, traumatic, all these traps that are, generations before us did, right? And so when we think about that, when we kind of go over this, it feels like it's a sentence. It feels like, okay, well then I'm just screwed, right? Like there's no chance for me to get out of this, right? But that's the beauty of it here, right? Because because these things, right, these traumas and these these tendencies that we have to to get into these really self harming and self traumatizing situations that we do. It's all based on those implicit memories and those implicit biases and that implicit behavior that we have, right? And so when we develop this awareness, right, we bring that implicit into the explicit once again, right? And when we do that as parents, what we're doing then is we're breaking that cycle, right? So when I practice mindfulness now, right, and I see exactly how my kid in the first, I didn't start practicing mindfulness until my children were like about 5 and 7 years old or something like that. No, like 3 and 5 years old, something like that. But I could already see how these patterns were taking hold in them, right? Like the same patterns that I went through, I could see it in them, right? And so now, right, because I have brought this into awareness, once I started practicing and it all became clear to me, now I see that doesn't have to be, and it's already changing. Okay, that's the beauty of it, right? That's the really magical, beautiful thing about these practices, is that especially with young children, they take root very, very quickly, right? When you as a parent change your behavior, and you as a parent stop that behavioral, sort of cycle of trauma and emotional, illiteracy and all the different things that happen, right? Your children change so quickly. Now, the younger they are, I'm not going to, be very honest with you. The younger your children are, the deeper and sort of faster that change is going to happen, right? But even, as an adult, these things can still change, right? So my point is that as we practice mindfulness as parents, right, we then give ourselves more control over this whole aspect of this cycle, this generational cycle. Now, some of it is not bad, right? Some of the traits that I received from my parents are good traits, and we don't have to tear down everything, right? And that's also the beautiful thing about it, is that once these things become explicit, we can control them. We can say like, okay, yeah, the empathy that I got from my parents and the compassion, that's good. So let's promote that with my children, right? But the sort of fear of rejection or something like that might have come from them, well, that's not good. So let's kind of, by bringing that into the explicit, we can see how our children might start to be feeling that way. And then through connecting to our children, right, which that's what this allows you to do. Like once you wash away all of this implicit, stuff that's going on, you then can connect on a deeper emotional level that's really based in right now. And you can do that with your children. And once you do that, now growth can really happen. And in growth, can come change, and can come really drastic changes. And I'm watching it in my family as we're going day by day. And so I'd love to talk to you about how I could help you to discover this same level of control that you can get over your sort of implicit generational tendencies and habits. And so please hit me up if you'd like. If you want more information, I would love to share some information with you. And again, I have this great program I'm going to start in a couple of weeks. So if you'd like to get into it, it's going to be limited spaces. I'm only doing about 10 people. So let me know, and I'll get you some information. All right, everybody. Thanks for listening. I'll talk to you later. Have a great day.